I found a hidden will behind our wedding photo my husband had left everything to, a stranger. But when I followed the clues, the truth was even worse. She was his secret daughter raised with my money behind my back. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss more shocking stories like this. Eleanor had lived in the old house on Chestnut Street for over 5 decades. It was a 3-story Victorian, its paint peeling in places, the porch creaking with every shift in the wind. The kind of house that whispered when it settled, sighed when you left, and held memories like dust in the corners of its hallways. At 74, Eleanor no longer fought the loneliness that came with every sunrise. She greeted it like an old friend, and passed her days moving through the rooms like a shadow still attached to someone who used to laugh. Her husband Michael had died 12 years earlier. Heart failure. No drama, no warning. Just one evening she'd come in from watering the garden to find him sitting upright in his armchair, his book half read, his lips parted like he'd been about to say something. That moment had frozen the house, and though she dusted, polished, rearranged the furniture, the silence never truly left. It was mid-March. Outside, the bare trees reached bony fingers against a sky that couldn't decide between rain or snow. Inside, the house smelled faintly of rose soap and cinnamon tea. Eleanor sat in the sunroom knitting a scarf she had no intention of wearing when the doorbell rang. She didn't move at first. People didn't just drop by anymore. Her few remaining friends were either too far or too frail, and the mailman never rang the bell. It rang again, firmer. She opened the door to find James standing there, his suit jacket too sharp for the neighborhood, his cologne already wafting into her foyer like it belonged. Her son had always carried himself like a man who didn't have time to be in the same room for long. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment before closing the door. "You're early." "You said Tuesday. It's Tuesday." "I said Tuesday afternoon." He shrugged, moving past her like a realtor evaluating square footage. "I figured we'd get a head start." "On what?" James turned around in the living room, spreading his arms as if she needed reminding. "On preparing the house for sale." There it was, the pitch, the reason for the cologne and the unannounced visit. "I told you I'm not selling." "Mom." He gave her that polished tone, the one he used in meetings, the one she hated most. "You're 74 years old. This house is too big for you. It's drafty old. You don't even use half the rooms. Don't you think it's time?" Eleanor looked past him toward the fireplace, where a photograph of her and Michael on their wedding day still sat framed in gold. "Time for what?" "For you to move in with us. We have the space now. The girls would love to have you around more. You've said how lonely it gets. You'll be safer. No more stairs to worry about." "I don't need help getting up the stairs. You fell in the kitchen last year." "I dropped a plate." "You fell, Mom." She walked to the armchair and sat down slowly, watching the way James moved, so sure, so impatient. The way he looked around the house with a kind of detachment that stung more than any insult. "You're not doing this for me," she said, voice quiet but firm. "You're doing this because you've already spoken to someone, a broker, a developer. You want to flip the house." James hesitated. "I didn't want to mention it until you were ready." "I'm not." He sat across from her, his voice lowering. "Mom, you're isolated out here. You don't drive anymore. You miss birthdays and holidays. The house needs repairs you can't keep up with. Be honest with yourself." "I am," she snapped. "This house is the last place where your father existed, where he loved me, where we raised you, and now you want to gut it, sell it to some stranger with granite countertops and no history." James sighed. "It's just a house." "No, it's not. It's a life." A silence fell between them, sharp as a crack in glass. James finally stood. "I didn't come here to fight. I came because I care. But I won't let you hurt yourself with nostalgia either." He walked toward the hallway. "I'll be upstairs," he added, "if you change your mind." Eleanor didn't answer. She waited until his footsteps disappeared, then sat in the stillness, her heart a mess of rage and heartbreak. She stared at the wall opposite her where their wedding photo hung. The frame was crooked, probably from the draft. She stood, walked across the room and reached up to adjust it. The moment her fingers touched the frame, It shifted oddly looser than it should have been. Frowning, she took it off the wall. The back of the frame had been tampered with, not recently. The backing paper was cut cleanly across one side, as if someone had once placed something inside. She tilted the frame forward, and a folded sheet of paper slipped out, landing silently on the floor. She stared at it. It was old. The paper yellowed and creased. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was handwritten. The penmanship was unmistakable. Michael's. The heading at the top read, "Last Will and Testament of Michael J. Dunne." Eleanor's breath caught in her chest. She sank into the couch and began to read. Eleanor stared at the name scrawled at the top of the second page, her hands trembling like dry leaves in a November wind. Rachel Dunne. She read it again and again. Her eyes followed the lines of Michael's handwriting, those familiar loops and careful flourishes that once signed birthday cards, checks, anniversary letters, now drawing a final verdict. "I, Michael J. Dunne, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave all property, assets, financial holdings, and personal belongings to Rachel Dunne." No mention of Eleanor, not even a passing acknowledgement. "No, my beloved wife, no, to be divided, no footnote, no apology, no explanation." Just a name, one Eleanor had never heard in her life. She blinked rapidly, trying to stop the sting behind her eyes. Her chest tightened, not with grief, but with something more raw, more jagged. Who the hell is Rachel Dunne? The sound of her son's footsteps creaking down the stairs startled her. She shoved the will into the pocket of her cardigan and stood quickly, the edges of the paper brushing against her ribs like thorns. James entered the living room holding a tablet. He barely looked up. "I just emailed you the inspection report," he said. "Foundation's still solid, but the roof will need a redo in 2 years max. Probably should factor that into any offers." Eleanor stared at him. "Did you know?" James looked up confused. "Know what?" She pulled the paper from her pocket and threw it onto the coffee table between them. It fluttered slightly, then rested face up in the same quiet way a body might settle in its grave. James leaned forward, read the title, scanned the first few lines. His eyes narrowed. "What the hell is this?" "You tell me," Eleanor replied, her voice sharp enough to slice through glass. "Where did you find it?" "Behind the wedding photo." He picked up the pages, flipping through as if trying to find a loophole. "This isn't the one the attorney read after Dad died. His assets went directly to you bank account's house pension. That's what they filed. I remember." Eleanor folded her arms. That will was dated 6 months before this one. James looked back at the pages now with a different urgency. "This doesn't make sense. Who is Rachel Dunne?" "I don't know." "You're sure it's real?" "It's in his handwriting." "That doesn't mean it's legal. There are witnesses listed." Eleanor hesitated. "No, it's unsigned, just written." James exhaled. "Then it's nothing. A draft, a thought. Maybe he never intended to submit it, but he hid it. Maybe he forgot it was there." Eleanor gave him a look that immediately killed that theory. James sat down hard on the sofa, the will still in his hand. "Okay, let's say for argument's sake it's real. What then?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "You'd have to contest it," he said. "Get it thrown out. No judge in their right mind is going to replace an executed, notarized will with a secret one scribbled on printer paper and hidden behind a picture frame. I don't care about the legality, James. I care about the intention." He laughed bitterly. "Come on, Mom, don't do this to yourself. Don't romanticize it." He wanted someone else to have everything. Maybe he was confused. Maybe this Rachel, whoever she is, was just a patient or someone he mentored. People do weird things as they get older. "He didn't even mention me." James hesitated. "That's the part that makes me think it's a mistake." Eleanor walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself, as though trying to hold herself together. "It doesn't matter if it's legal," she said quietly. "What matters is that he wrote it. He thought it. He made a decision and didn't tell me." James rubbed his face, groaning. "Mom, you want to blow up your life because of this, because of one name on a page. I want to know who she is. And if she's a con artist, then I'll find out. If she's nothing, Mom, if this is all some misunderstanding, you'll have ripped open old wounds for nothing." Eleanor turned around sharply. "And if she's not? What then? I just pretend my husband didn't write this." James stood. "We can destroy it. Right now. Pretend we never saw it. It's not even signed. No one ever has to know." The suggestion slapped her harder than any argument could. "Is that what you think I am?" she said, her voice cold. "A woman who hides from the truth because it's inconvenient. I think James said slowly that you're a woman who deserves peace, not chaos, not ghosts." Eleanor stared at him, the air between them thick with things unsaid. "I'm going to find her," she said, "whoever she is. And I'm going to ask her one question: why?" James shook his head in frustration. "This is insane. You don't even know where to start." "I'll start where I always start, with what I know." He moved toward the door. "You're letting this house consume you." She said nothing. James paused. "You want my advice? Pretend you never saw that paper. Some things are better left buried." Eleanor walked past him and picked the paper up again, folding it carefully. "No," she said. "Some things are better dug up so they can stop rotting the soil." James left without saying another word. Once he was gone, Eleanor sat in the armchair again. She unfolded the paper once more, rereading the same sentences until they were branded on the back of her eyelids. Rachel Dunne. She whispered the name to the quiet house, hoping it might answer her back. But the walls said nothing. She got up and walked to the study. There was an old cedar filing cabinet Michael had kept locked for years, long after retirement. She'd never bothered with it. The key was still hanging on a hook behind the bookcase. She opened it and began to go through the drawers. One folder caught her eye, labeled in Michael's tidy script, tax correspondence, personal accounts. Inside, receipts, letters, and near the back a few checks written to a name that stopped her heart. Rachel Dunne, $500, $1,000. Sporadic intervals, over 15 years, memo lines blank, no addresses listed, no explanations. Eleanor sat down slowly, her breath shallow. The checks were dated across 2 decades. Some were as old as Rachel herself might be. She stared at them, her hands shaking harder now. This wasn't a one-time donation. This was sustained, intentional, hidden, and personal. She placed the checks beside the will. Michael's handwriting, Michael's checks. 2 voices from the grave telling the same story. Her husband had been living a second life when she'd never been part of. And someone out there, someone named Rachel, had lived her entire life, never knowing what she'd meant to the man. Eleanor thought she knew better than anyone. Or maybe she did know him, just not all of him. And now she had a name, and questions, and a storm waking up in her chest that would not be silenced. She reached for the landline on the desk and dialed the old library. "Salem Historical Records," the voice answered. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I'd like to request assistance locating someone. Her name is Rachel Dunne." Eleanor stood at the edge of the old brick building on Washington Street, clutching her coat tighter around her. The law offices of Keene and Baxter hadn't changed in over 2 decades. Same chipped green door, same brass nameplate dulled by weather and time. She hadn't been here since Michael died. Back then, everything had been handled swiftly. Michael had been a man who left everything in order, or so she thought. She pushed the door open, the faint smell of old paper and furniture polish washing over her like a ghost's exhale. "Mrs. Dunne." The receptionist looked up with a smile that faded when she saw Eleanor's expression. "Mr. Keene is still in his office. He doesn't take many clients these days, but he said he'd make time for you." "Thank you." Eleanor followed her down the hallway, her shoes tapping lightly on the scuffed wood floors. Framed diplomas and faded legal commendations lined the walls. It was a corridor of history, dignified, uneventful, and yet today it felt like the threshold of something unraveling. Mr. Keene rose slowly as she entered his office. He was older now, white-haired and thinner, but his handshake was still steady, his eyes still sharp. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing toward a leather chair. "It's been a long time." She nodded stiffly and sat. "Yes, it has." "What brings you in?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled the folded pages from her purse and slid them across his desk. Keene opened them without a word. As his eyes scanned the lines, his brows slowly drew together. When he reached the name Rachel Dunne, his fingers paused. He looked up at her. "Where did you find this?" "Behind a picture frame," she said. "In the living room. It's in Michael's handwriting." He nodded slowly. "It is." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "So it's real." "I remember him writing it," Keene said, leaning back in his chair. "I just never thought he kept a copy." "You were his attorney," she said, her voice rising. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he never filed it. He brought it to me one rainy afternoon, sat exactly where you are now. Said he needed to make an amendment to his will. He was quiet, reflective. I asked him if you were aware. He said no. Eleanor's stomach turned. I drafted a formal version based on this. Keene continued. But he never signed it. Said he needed to think it over. Then he never mentioned it again. So what was it, she asked bitterly. An impulse, a mistake. He was quiet. Finally, he reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the desk. I think you should see this. Eleanor opened the file and immediately stilled. On top was a photograph, faded, yellowed at the edges. It showed a man and a woman, herself and Michael, standing in front of a fire truck. Between them was a little girl, barefoot, her soot-streaked face staring wide-eyed into the camera. Her arms were wrapped in a wool blanket. The smoke curled behind them like a second ghost. Eleanor stared at it. This was the fire on Laurel Avenue. Yes, Keene said. You and Michael were walking home from dinner. You saw the house on fire. You both rushed in before the fire department arrived. I remember, she whispered. You pulled the girl out yourself, he said. Michael never forgot it. Eleanor looked at the child again. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks raw from heat and tears. Her name was Rachel, Keene added. Rachel Dunne. Her mother died in that fire. Eleanor's chest tightened. She was 5. 4, actually. Memories returned in scattered shards. The sirens. The woman's scream from upstairs that was silenced too fast. Michael lifting the child from the floor. Eleanor carrying her down the porch steps, arms burning. The girl never made a sound. Not then. Not once. She was sent to a foster home after that, Keene said. Michael kept tabs on her. Eleanor turned sharply. What does that mean? He donated to her school anonymously. Covered some medical expenses. Sent small amounts here and there. For how long? Keene hesitated. Until he died. Eleanor looked down at the photo again. The little girl's eyes were striking. Large, dark, filled with something too old for her face. Pain, confusion. A child plucked from fire and dropped into another kind of unknown. He never told me. I don't think he meant to hide it, Eleanor. I think he didn't know how to explain it. She stared at the photo, the child's expression now shifting into something else. Recognition. Unfinished debt. Legacy. He wrote a will, she said. He wanted her to have everything. He never finalized it, but he meant it. Keene didn't reply. He didn't need to. Eleanor closed the folder and held it against her lap like a weapon or maybe a shield. She lived near us. Yes, her mother rented the back unit of the Jennings house. Eleanor remembered that now the quiet woman with sad eyes who rarely spoke. And the little girl who played in the alleyway, always barefoot, always watching. You think he felt responsible? Eleanor asked. I think he loved her, Keene said softly. Not romantically, not like that, but as a father might. The air in the room changed. Eleanor sat up straighter. What do you mean? Keene paused. I never asked, he said. But the way he spoke about her, the way he worried, there was something deeper. Eleanor shook her head slowly. That's impossible. I'm not saying he had an affair. I'm saying he saw that child come out of a burning house, and he decided she was his to protect. And he never once told his wife. Keene's silence was answer enough. Eleanor stood. I need her address. He looked uncertain. Eleanor, I'm not here for comfort. I want the truth. Keene sighed. I only have an old mailing address. She moved around a lot. But last I checked, she was working at a public library in Essex. That's enough. He handed her a business card. Take this too, just in case. She slipped it into her coat pocket and walked out without another word. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her lungs like ice water. Her hands trembled not from the temperature but from the weight of the folder in her bag, the photo still vivid behind her eyes. Rachel Dunne. Not just a name now, a face, a fire, a story buried under ash. As she walked back toward her car, the street blurred slightly. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she drove. Without thinking, without pausing to second-guess herself. Her hands gripped the wheel like it was the only thing holding her to the world. Essex wasn't far, a 40-minute drive. But to Eleanor it felt like crossing decades. She pulled into a small parking lot behind a modest brick building with a sign that read, Essex Public Library. The afternoon sun was filtered through gray clouds, lending everything the same nostalgic tint as the photo in her bag. She turned off the engine and sat for a long time, her heart a dull roar in her ears. This wasn't just about finding Rachel anymore. It was about finding what Michael had never given her. Not money, not answers, but intention. She climbed out of the car and walked toward the door. The bell above the library door gave a soft chime as Eleanor stepped inside. The air carried the scent of old paper and laminated plastic, familiar and comforting, like the quiet hush that settled over churches or cemeteries. It was a modest building tucked between a flower shop and a post office, barely noticeable from the road, and yet it felt like she had crossed some invisible threshold. She paused just inside the entrance, eyes adjusting to the soft lighting. No fluorescent glare here, just warm desk lamps and tall windows draped with gauzy curtains that filtered the cloudy light. A woman stood behind the main desk, organizing a stack of returned books. Mid-30s, shoulder-length dark hair pulled into a low bun, no makeup, simple cardigan over a floral dress. She moved with quiet precision, her fingers nimble, her expression serene. Eleanor knew it was her even before the name tag caught the light. Rachel, circulation manager. For a long moment she just watched. Rachel looked nothing like the soot-covered girl from the photograph, and yet there was something in her eyes. Something still alert, almost too alert, as though she'd spent a lifetime watching for danger even in the safest places. Eleanor walked up to the desk. "Hi there," she said, her voice a bit too careful. Rachel looked up and smiled a gentle practiced smile. "Good afternoon. Can I help you find something?" I was hoping to do some research," Eleanor replied. "I'm writing something about the town's history. Old homes, families, things like that." "Well, you've come to the right place," Rachel said with a nod. "Are you looking for anything specific?" "Not yet, just starting out, really. Figured I'd see what I could dig up." Rachel gestured toward a corner reading table. "We've got archives back through the 1920s, newspaper reels, family registries, a few property maps." "That sounds perfect." Rachel walked around the counter and led Eleanor to the back section. "You said you're writing a book." "Something like that," Eleanor murmured. "Memoir, maybe." "Still figuring it out." Rachel laughed softly. "Aren't we all?" They reached the shelves. Rachel began pulling binders from the top row, careful, methodical, clearly familiar with each one. "Start with these. Local housing developments. You'll find everything from census records to building permits. If you want anything older, I can pull the microfilm." Eleanor sat slowly watching the younger woman move. There was no arrogance in her, no flash, just quiet warmth. A steadiness Eleanor hadn't expected. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "On and off," Rachel replied, sliding a binder across the table. "Foster homes, college, some city hopping. I came back a few years ago." "You like it?" Rachel shrugged. "It's peaceful, and books don't lie to you." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That's one way to look at it." Rachel paused a moment, studying Eleanor. "You don't sound like you're from around here." "I'm not, Salem." Rachel raised her eyebrows. "Haunted town. Pretty place." "Haunted's about right." They shared a quiet chuckle. Eleanor flipped through a few pages, not really reading. Her heart was hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of the folder in her purse, the photo inside it like a live coal. And yet here Rachel was not a shadow or a threat, but a person, flesh and blood and kindness. "I remember a fire," Rachel said suddenly, her voice softer. "When I was a kid." Eleanor froze. Rachel continued, her tone wistful. "I was 4. Our house burned down. It was horrible. I don't remember much, just smoke and noise, but there was a woman, someone pulled me out." Eleanor's throat tightened. Rachel smiled almost dreamily. She had curly hair and smelled like soap. "I used to dream about her sometimes. I think she saved my life." Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were trembling beneath the table. "Anyway," Rachel said, shaking off the memory, "it's weird what sticks." "Do you know who she was?" Eleanor asked, barely above a whisper. "No idea. They said a couple rescued me, but I never saw them again. I used to hope she was my real mom or something. Silly, right?" Eleanor's vision blurred. Rachel tilted her head. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Eleanor lied. But her chest suddenly constricted, the room tilted. She reached for the edge of the table, but the world was slipping sideways. Everything, Rachel's voice, the shelves, the warmth, faded to a hum. She blacked out. When she came to the ceiling above her was painted lavender. There was a small fan spinning slowly, and someone was placing a cool cloth on her forehead. "Hey," Rachel said gently. "You're okay, you fainted." Eleanor blinked. She was lying on a couch, not the library. My apartment's upstairs, Rachel explained. It's above the library. You weren't waking up, so I carried you up here. You shouldn't have. I wasn't about to let a sweet old lady hit the floor and disappear into the streets. Eleanor tried to sit up. Rachel gently guided her back down. Easy, just breathe. I made tea. The smell of chamomile drifted from the nearby kitchenette. Eleanor looked around. The apartment was small but inviting. Warm lighting, potted plants, shelves packed with worn novels. A few photos on the wall, nothing extravagant. A life built in pieces, carefully curated. Rachel handed her the tea. Their hands brushed. You gave me a scare, she said. I'm sorry. Low blood sugar, maybe? Maybe. Rachel sat down on a stool beside the couch. You remind me of someone, she said after a beat. Eleanor's stomach turned. Oh, my foster mother, Evelyn. She was kind, wore wool cardigans and said things like damn shame whenever something broke. Eleanor smiled faintly. Sounds like my kind of woman. She passed a few years ago. Cancer. She left me this apartment. First time in my life I felt like something belonged to me. Eleanor sipped the tea. Her hands steadier now, but her insides were in chaos. This woman, this girl from the fire, was not what she'd expected. She wasn't an opportunist, wasn't cruel, wasn't entitled. She was good, honest, and kind. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the fan and the clink of porcelain as Rachel adjusted her cup. You said you're writing a memoir, Rachel said. May I ask, why this town? Eleanor looked up. I'm searching for something, she said. Someone. Rachel nodded slowly. Aren't we all? Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness behind it. I think you might be closer to it than you think. They sat in silence, sipping tea like two strangers standing at the edge of a cliff, unaware that the same wind was about to push them both over. But Eleanor didn't say anything more. Not yet, because the truth once spoken couldn't be taken back, and she wasn't ready for Rachel to know that the woman she remembered from the fire was sitting right in front of her, or that the man who rescued her had left behind something much heavier than memory. Inheritance, responsibility, and a story Eleanor wasn't sure how to tell. Not until she knew what kind of ending Rachel deserved. Eleanor sat stiffly on Rachel's couch, her teacup now cold in her hand. She'd barely heard the last few minutes of conversation. The world had gone muffled like listening from underwater. Her eyes drifted toward the small bookshelf across the room. Tucked into a wooden frame sat an old, slightly faded photograph. At first glance, it appeared innocent, a man and a young girl, at what looked like a community fair paper lanterns, hanging behind them cotton candy in the girl's hand. But the man, it was Michael, younger, no gray in his hair yet, wearing the navy sweater she'd knitted him one Christmas. His arm was around the girl around Rachel. He was smiling. The kind of smile he hadn't worn in years, not even with her. Something cracked inside Eleanor. Rachel followed her gaze. Oh, that, she said with a warm laugh. I barely remember when that was taken. I think I was 10, maybe 11. Eleanor blinked hard. You knew him. Rachel nodded, still smiling, unaware of the storm gathering across from her. He came to see me a few times at this awful group home outside Marblehead. He never said much about who he was. He just showed up. Quiet. Kind. Brought books, little puzzles. I called him the man with the quiet hands. She laughed again, nostalgic. He never made me feel like a burden. Eleanor said nothing. Rachel's tone softened. I used to think maybe he was a relative, but they said he was just a family friend who helped when he could. I never even knew his name until much later. Just remembered how safe I felt when he was around. He always called me kiddo. Eleanor's grip on the teacup tightened. I don't know what happened to him, Rachel continued. He stopped coming when I turned 16. I guess life moves on. Eleanor stood too quickly. The blood drained from her head again, but this time she powered through the wave of dizziness. I should go. Rachel rose, concerned. Wait, are you sure you're okay? I'm fine, just too much excitement for one afternoon. Rachel reached for her coat. Let me at least walk you down. No, Eleanor snapped more sharply than she intended. Then catching herself, she softened. Please, I need air. Alone. Rachel looked hurt but nodded. All right, just promise me you'll rest when you get home. Eleanor managed a nod and turned toward the door, but the photo of Michael seemed to burn into her back as she left. It was still there, framed proof of something she could no longer deny. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was framed on someone else's shelf. She drove home in silence. The road blurred. The sky was gray thick with the kind of clouds that carried neither storm nor sun, just wait. Eleanor walked into the house like she was stepping into a crime scene. Every wall now felt false, every room echoing with things unsaid. She made her way to the study with mechanical determination. The old cedar filing cabinet loomed like a confession booth. She opened the bottom drawer. This time she didn't stop at the first folder. She pulled out everything: binders, envelopes, bank statements. At first there was nothing unusual. Tax returns, utility bills, charitable donations. But tucked into an unmarked envelope were dozens of money orders, all addressed to foster care agencies, tutoring programs, private medical practices. The sender's name was always the same, Michael J. Dunne, and the recipient, Rachel E. Dunne. Eleanor's hands trembled as she pulled them out one by one. The amounts varied: $300 here, $1, $200 there. Some were monthly, some quarterly. A few marked tuition, others with nothing but a blank line. The earliest one was dated 1989. She had just turned 39 that year, and Michael had already been sending money to Rachel for over 30 years. Her stomach turned. She opened Michael's desk drawer and retrieved an old journal, one of the ones he never let her read. She flipped through page after page of work notes, scribbled schedules, sermon reflections from their church days, until halfway through the tone shifted. Saw her again today. The bruises were gone this time. She's learning to lie with her eyes, something no child should have to know. Sent a check to the Wilcox shelter. They said she needs dental surgery. I didn't ask questions. Rachel turned 13 today. She didn't smile. I brought her a red scarf. She said it was the nicest thing anyone had ever given her. If anything ever happens to me, someone must look after her. The system is cruel. She deserves more. The entries weren't dated like a diary. They were sporadic, but they carried the same signature at the bottom of each one, MJD. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the journal in her lap, the money orders spread out like damning snowflakes across the floor. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't a pity project. This was a secret life. He had loved her, protected her, hid her. Eleanor didn't know what hurt more, that he had done it, or that he had done it alone. The image of Michael with Rachel at the fair replayed in her mind. That same sweater, that same smile, a smile she hadn't seen in their own photos for years. Had he grown distant because of guilt, or because she reminded him of what he had left behind? She reached into a smaller box at the bottom of the drawer, an old tin where Michael kept sentimental things. Inside were postcards from their honeymoon, a dried rose, and at the bottom, folded into fourths, a letter. It was addressed to Eleanor, in handwriting older and shakier than the will. If you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to tell you. I wish I could explain this with my voice, not this ink. But there are some truths we bury too deep to speak aloud. Rachel is not my daughter, not biologically, but she is mine in every way that matters. I found her when she was 4, covered in soot, left behind by a world too busy to notice. I saw myself in her, the abandoned, the forgotten. Loving her did not mean I stopped loving you. It meant I learned a new kind of love, one I didn't think I was capable of. I didn't want to choose between you. So I lived between truths, and in doing so I failed you both. If you can forgive me, thank you. If you can't, I understand. But please, if she comes to claim what's left, don't send her away. She never asked for any of this. She just survived. Michael. Eleanor folded the letter back, her hands too numb to cry. The weight of it all. The will, the checks, the photo, the scarf he had never mentioned, the smile he had given another girl. It settled into her bones like winter. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about a man trying to live two truths in a world that allowed only one, and now she was left to sort through the wreckage. She walked to the fireplace and lit the kindling. For a moment she considered tossing the letter in, but instead she held it close, then placed it inside her coat pocket. Some things didn't need to be burned to be understood. She sat in the armchair, the fire crackling gently. Outside the sky was darkening. She had decisions to make. About the house, about the will, about Rachel. But not tonight. Tonight she would sit with the truth and let it ache. The rain began just after dusk, soft and steady, as if the sky was mourning with her. Eleanor stood at the edge of her dining room table, staring down at the open journal, the money orders, the letter from Michael. She had laid them out like evidence in a trial, but no jury, no verdict, just silence. Crushing, undeniable silence. The envelope she'd found earlier in the tin box was still clutched in her hand. She hadn't opened it yet. The handwriting on the front was older than the others, not Michael's. She took a breath, sat down, and unfolded the letter inside. The paper crackled. The ink had bled slightly, old enough to have weathered time, but still legible. Dear Michael, if something happens to me, if I can't come back, I need you to look after her. You said you would. I believe you. I've kept the truth from Eleanor. I know it's cowardly, but if she finds out, don't let her blame Rachel. The girl is blameless. I was the one who stayed too long. I was the one who... I just wanted to believe I could survive. But now it's too dangerous. Her name is Rachel. She deserves more than this life has offered her. And if Eleanor ever learns the truth, I hope one of you can forgive me. No signature, just the ache of a woman vanishing into fear. Eleanor dropped the letter onto the table like it had burned her. So it was true. Rachel wasn't just a child her husband had saved. She was his child, the girl from the yard. The woman who lived behind their home, the quiet one, the tenant Eleanor barely noticed. Michael had always been the one to bring her soup when she was sick, to check on her after storms, to suggest lowering her rent during Christmas. Eleanor had assumed it was pity, kindness. That was his nature, but now she saw it differently. It was care, it was guilt, it was love, and she had been a fool not to see it. The front door slammed. Eleanor looked up sharply, startled. Mom, a voice called from the hallway. Mom, where the hell are you? James. She didn't answer. He found her in the dining room, his shoes soaked, his coat dripping. I stopped by and found Rachel's name in Dad's old files, he said, holding up a manila folder. And this letter you apparently weren't going to tell me about. What the hell is going on? Eleanor said nothing. She had no strength left to soften the truth. Is she his? James snapped. Is that what this is? Some charity case Dad knocked up, and now we're just supposed to hand over everything because he felt bad. Eleanor's jaw clenched. Don't. James slammed the folder on the table. Don't what? Don't ask questions while you rewrite the will for some bastard kid nobody knew existed. She's not a bastard, Eleanor said, voice cold. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a more elegant word for secret half-sister who gets everything while the actual family gets screwed? She didn't ask for any of this. Yeah. Well, neither did I. James began pacing, wild energy vibrating through him. I have a mortgage, 2 kids, a wife who already thinks I'm a failure. I've been waiting, Mom, waiting for this house, for some kind of future, and now you're telling me it's going to her. This isn't about you. The hell it isn't. Eleanor rose slowly. You never cared about this house, James. You only started calling me Mom again when you found out it was worth something. His face reddened. That's not true. Yes, it is, she snapped. You haven't visited in months. You didn't even send flowers on your father's birthday. And now you're here screaming about your future. You weren't even part of his past. He stepped back like she'd slapped him. I'm trying to protect what's ours, he said, quieter now, but seething. You want to throw it away for some charity child you barely know. I knew her, Eleanor said. Long before you were ever told the truth. I saw her at 4 years old, pulled from fire. I carried her, James. I looked into her eyes, and I saw fear that no child should ever have to know. And your father saw more than that. He saw family. She's not family. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She is to me. James stared at her like she was a stranger. His voice turned low and sharp. I'll take this to court. Eleanor nodded. Of course you will. You're losing your mind. No, she said. I'm finally seeing clearly. James stepped closer, lowering his voice like a threat. You think judges will hand over everything to some illegitimate woman from the library just because you feel guilty? Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't ask for the will. She didn't even know who Michael was. You're the only one here turning grief into greed. Don't talk to me about grief, James growled. You never cried at his funeral. Because I was too busy cleaning up his legacy, she said, eyes blazing. Covering for his lies for yours. Trying to salvage what little dignity this family had left. James grabbed the folder and stormed toward the door. You're going to regret this. She didn't follow him. didn't call after him. The door slammed a second time, and Eleanor was alone again. She stood there for a long time, the rain still tapping the windows like the echo of withheld rage. The dining room, once warm with laughter and tea and Michael's old jazz records, now felt like a courtroom, a battlefield. She looked around the room not with nostalgia but with clarity. Everything had been built on silence, and now the silence had been broken. She returned to the table, picked up the letter from Rachel's mother, then the letter from Michael, then the photo. She gathered them one by one, slow and deliberate. There would be no lawsuits, no secrets, no shame. This story didn't belong to James. It belonged to truth, and she had decided she would not lie for a man already dead. She would not steal from a girl who had already lost everything once. She would not let her son turn pain into power. She would not become what they had been. Eleanor walked into the hallway and opened the small cedar chest by the stairs. Inside was a box labeled Estate Documents, Michael Dunne. She added the photo, the letters, and the journal. She placed the folder in the center. Then she closed the lid. Tomorrow she would see a lawyer. Not to fight, but to confirm. Rachel Dunne would inherit the house. Not out of guilt, but because Michael had made a choice, and now Eleanor was ready to make hers. The library was nearly empty when Eleanor stepped through its glass doors. Late afternoon sun spilled through the high windows, casting amber light across the polished floors. The silence was different here, not lonely but reverent, like a cathedral of memory. Rachel stood at the information desk, sorting through a stack of newly returned books. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She looked up as Eleanor approached and froze. Her smile faltered. "Mrs. Dunne," she said carefully. "Are you feeling better?" Eleanor gave a slow nod. "Yes, thank you for the tea and for getting me home." Rachel hesitated. "Would you like to sit down?" "No," Eleanor said quietly. "I came to tell you the truth." Rachel's brows drew together. "I know who you are," Eleanor said, "and I know what you meant to him." Rachel opened her mouth, but no sound came. "I'm Michael's wife." The word struck like a bell. Rachel staggered backward, slightly, eyes wide. "Wait, what?" Eleanor held her gaze. "I'm his widow. We were married for over 40 years. He died in that house, our house. The house he left. To you." Rachel looked like she had been punched. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't. He never said, he never." "I know," Eleanor said. "He didn't tell me about you either." The color drained from Rachel's face. She stepped out from behind the desk, trembling. "I swear to you, I never knew. I thought he was just a kind stranger, a man who cared. I never asked for money, never asked for—" "I'm not accusing you," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not here to take anything back, or to blame you. I just need to understand what I never got to know." Rachel stared at her for a long time. Breath. Shallow hands clutched tight against her chest, like she was trying to stop her heart from falling apart. Finally she nodded. "Come with me," she said, her voice breaking. They walked together through a narrow hallway at the back of the library, past the offices, past the archives, down a set of old wooden steps that led to the basement storage. Rachel unlocked a small door marked private. Inside was a modest room, dimly lit. Shelves lined with labeled boxes. A small table, a few chairs. At the center stood a single trunk, aged leather worn at the edges. Rachel knelt beside it, unlatched the locks, and opened the lid. Inside were years of correspondence, neatly tied bundles of letters, faded photographs, small objects, an origami crane, a pressed flower, a plastic toy elephant. Rachel picked up one of the letters and handed it to Eleanor. "I started saving everything after I turned 16, she said softly. "He stopped coming in person then, but the letters kept coming. Once a month like clockwork, sometimes short, sometimes pages long. He never signed them with his full name, just M or your friend. But I always knew it was him." Eleanor sat down slowly, the letter trembling in her hands. She opened it. "Dear Rachel, I saw a bird today that reminded me of you, wild and stubborn, and too bright for the sky it flew in. I wonder if you still dance to music only you can hear. I hope you do. The world needs more of that kind of courage." Eleanor blinked back tears. "He never stopped caring," Rachel said, voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I didn't write back. Even when I thought he had forgotten me. Every birthday he sent a note. Every year on the anniversary of the fire, he mailed me a poem. He never missed a single one. Eleanor nodded slowly, her throat aching. Another letter. You are not forgotten. Not by the universe. Not by me. If this world tries to erase you, remember there is someone who will always remember your name. Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest, eyes shut. For so many years, she had wondered why Michael became distant in the last stretch of his life. Why he would spend hours alone in the study. Why he stared so long at the garden where the tenant used to live. She had thought it was regret or depression or age. She hadn't known it was mourning. Not for the life they had shared, but for the piece of himself he had hidden away. I used to think maybe he was an angel, Rachel said, a smile flickering through the tears. A guardian. Someone sent to save me. I didn't know he was married, that he had a family. Eleanor met her eyes. He was a good man, she said. But he was a coward, too. He should have told me. Told both of us. He thought he was protecting everyone, but he just left us with ghosts. Rachel looked down ashamed. If you want the house, I'll sign whatever you need. I don't want to fight. I never wanted anything. Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. I'm not here for the house, she said, her voice steady. I'm here because I missed a part of the man I loved. I lived beside him for decades and never saw this piece of his heart. And now I want to see it, even if it hurts. Rachel's lip trembled. I wish I could have known you then, she whispered. Eleanor smiled, eyes glistening. I wish I could have known you. The trunk between them was no longer a relic. It was a bridge. Eleanor picked up a photograph Rachel at age 8, grinning with missing teeth, a scarf wrapped around her neck. Michael's scarf. She laughed through her tears. He gave you that. He said it was knitted by someone special. He never said who. Eleanor touched the edge of the photo. It was me. Rachel's breath caught. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by letters and time and unspoken grief. Finally, Eleanor stood. I won't pretend this is easy, she said, but I came here to choose understanding over bitterness, to choose memory over anger. I won't be the woman who poisons a legacy because it didn't go the way I planned. Rachel nodded, eyes full. You still have so many of his words, Eleanor said, motioning to the letters. I only have the silence. You're welcome to read any of them, all of them. Eleanor looked down at the trunk, then at the woman in front of her, the girl her husband had tried to protect, the daughter he never named but never forgot. I think, Eleanor said slowly, we have more in common than I thought. Rachel smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Would you like to stay for tea, she asked. Eleanor considered, then nodded. Yes, I would. And for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor followed someone into a kitchen, not out of duty, not out of politeness, but out of choice, out of love. A different kind of love, the kind you decide to carry even when it wasn't born from you. The knock came just after noon. Rachel had just placed 2 mugs of chamomile tea on the living room table when the sound echoed through her small house like a warning bell. Eleanor sat up straighter in her chair, eyes narrowing toward the door. Rachel hesitated, expecting anyone. No, Eleanor said, but I have a feeling. Rachel opened the door slowly, and there he was. James, not alone. A man in a tailored suit stood beside him, briefcase in one hand, smug certainty in the other. His eyes swept over Rachel's modest home with polite disdain. James didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped in, his face tense, voice already raised. We need to talk, now. Eleanor stood. James, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place, he said sharply. Because this house, like it or not, is still under legal dispute. Rachel froze, clutching the edge of the sofa like it might float her out of the room. Eleanor's voice was cold. There is no dispute. James turned to the lawyer beside him. Tell them. The man cleared his throat. As counsel representing Mr. James Dunne, we intend to challenge the most recent version of the will. Given the sudden revelation of a secondary heir and possible undue influence. Stop, Eleanor interrupted. The lawyer blinked. Ma'am, I said stop. You're standing in a home that doesn't belong to you. You came here armed with suspicion and greed, and you're talking about undue influence on a man who's been dead for 12 years. James stepped forward. He was our father. Eleanor didn't flinch. Then maybe you should have listened to what he said when he was alive. James scoffed. You think his word, what some scribbled note, can hold up in probate? A judge won't just roll over because of sentiment, Mom. Eleanor looked at Rachel, then calmly walked to her purse resting on the chair. She pulled out a small flash drive. It's not a note. What's that? Eleanor met his eyes. Your father recorded something. A voice message. He gave it to his attorney 10 months before he died. I never knew it existed until I asked the right questions. She walked toward the TV, plugged the flash drive into the small speaker dock Rachel used for audiobooks, and pressed play. Static. Then, Michael's voice, soft and aged but unmistakably his. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get a chance to explain, and if that's the case, I'm sorry. I failed you all in ways you didn't see, but this is something I need you to understand. Silence filled the room. I owe Eleanor a life. She gave me decades of love, patience, forgiveness. But I also owe Rachel something. Not love, I wasn't brave enough for that. What I owe her is truth. I left her alone in a world that tried to erase her. I couldn't fix the past. But I can leave her something. This house was never just bricks and wood. It was where I was whole. She deserves to feel that too. Not because I loved her mother, not because I failed Eleanor, but because she is mine, and I refuse to let her be forgotten again. Another beat of silence. I hope somewhere there's room for all of us, even now. Click. The room was completely still. The lawyer cleared his throat again, this time uncertainly. This appears to be preemptive testimony. Eleanor turned to him. Is it admissible? He looked at James, then nodded. Yes. Rachel hadn't moved. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her hands gripping her own arms, like she was trying to hold herself in place. James looked hollow, colorless. He stared at the speaker like it had just betrayed him. That doesn't change the law, he said weakly. He didn't go through proper channels. He didn't file an amendment. He filed everything Eleanor said. With a second lawyer, one you didn't know about. I have the documents. You want to go to court, James, go ahead, but you'll lose. And you'll lose in public. His face flushed. So what, you're choosing her over your own son? Eleanor's voice trembled, but not from fear. I'm not choosing anyone. Michael already did. She walked toward him, her steps slow and heavy like a verdict. But I am choosing what kind of woman I'll be in the last years of my life. I could stand behind you and pretend you're fighting for something noble. Or I can face the truth and stop pretending blood is the only thing that makes a family. James shook his head. You're being emotional. I'm being honest. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You came here with a lawyer instead of an apology. You didn't ask what I wanted. You didn't ask what he wanted. You just assumed this house was your inheritance, like a prize at the end of a game. I earned this, James spat. I'm his son. Eleanor's eyes softened. No, she whispered. You're just the one who came first. He went silent. The weight of those words settled in the air like dust. Rachel moved at last, standing beside Eleanor but saying nothing. She didn't need to. James turned to his lawyer, his face twisted in frustration. Let's go. The man nodded and followed him out. No goodbyes, just the slam of the door behind them. Eleanor's shoulders dropped, her body seeming to deflate in the stillness that followed. Rachel exhaled, still shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause... You didn't cause anything, Eleanor said. Michael did. She walked slowly back to the sofa and sat down. Rachel hesitated, then sat beside her. I thought losing him once was enough, Eleanor said quietly. But I've lost him again. And this time, I think I understand him better, but it still hurts. Rachel nodded. He hurt me too, but he tried to fix it. Eleanor reached for her tea. And maybe that's all we get. The trying. Not perfect endings. Just the chance to do one thing better than we did before. They sat there in silence, two women bound by grief, betrayal, and the one man who had loved them both differently and deeply. And as the sun began to dip behind the clouds outside, casting a golden hue over the wooden floors, Eleanor finally allowed herself to cry. But they weren't bitter tears. They were the kind that cleared space for something new. Not forgetting, not erasing, but beginning again. It rained softly the morning Eleanor returned to the house on Chestnut Street. Not the cold gray rain that buried memories, but the kind that stirred the soil, brought out the scent of lilac, and washed the dust from old windows. The sky was silver blue, and for the first time in years the garden bloomed early. Rachel stood at the porch, a faded yellow raincoat draped over her shoulders, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She looked nervous, like a guest in a house that wasn't yet hers. Eleanor smiled as she climbed the steps, umbrella in hand. "You look just like your mother in that coat," she said. Rachel blinked. "You knew her?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "But I imagine she wore her worry the same way you do, like a second skin." They stood quietly under the porch awning, the silence tender this time, not heavy. After a few moments, Eleanor reached into her bag and handed Rachel a key tarnished, slightly bent, with a green thread tied through the hole. Rachel didn't take it. Her voice trembled. "Are you sure?" Eleanor nodded. "This house is yours now." Rachel stared at the key like it might vanish in her hand. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Eleanor replied. "I've said enough to ghosts for both of us." They entered the house together. It hadn't changed. The wallpaper was still fraying near the staircase, the wooden floor groaned at the usual corners, and Michael's old record player sat on the sideboard covered in a thin veil of time. Rachel looked around the living room, eyes wide. "I used to imagine what it looked like inside. I walked past this house every Sunday on the way to school." "You never knocked." Rachel shook her head. "It wasn't mine to knock on." Eleanor walked to the record player, brushed off the dust, and opened the cabinet below. Inside, the same collection of vinyls Michael had arranged by genre: jazz, classical, a few old rock albums just for fun. She pulled one from the middle, Billie Holiday. She placed the record gently onto the turntable and lowered the arm. The crackle came first, then the familiar hum of a melody Eleanor had almost forgotten. Billie's voice floated through the room, warm and mournful, like someone sighing goodbye through a memory. Rachel smiled. "He used to hum this in his letters," she said softly. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. He hummed it while brushing his teeth, while waiting for tea to boil, while staring out the window. "I used to find it annoying." She laughed. "Now I can't believe I'll never hear it again." They moved through the house in tandem, room by room, dusting shelves, folding blankets, packing away Eleanor's belongings with slow, unspoken respect. They didn't speak much, but when they did, it was simple things. "This photo goes with you." "No, keep that chair. This drawer's stuck." "I know, always has been." Outside, the rain stopped. The sun began to filter through the gray, staining the garden in light. Eleanor stood by the window, watching daffodils tremble in the breeze. "This garden," she said, "was the first thing he built with his hands. Every spring he made me promise not to touch the violets. He said they chose where they wanted to grow." Rachel smiled faintly. "He wrote about those violets." "I bet he did." They walked outside together down the stone path, now edged in green. The garden, though overgrown in places, breathed with life. They didn't speak as they walked. There was nothing left to prove, nothing to untangle. Just two women walking side by side in the place where one life had been split in two and now quietly joined again. Eleanor paused near the rosebush. "I've lived in this house longer than I've lived anywhere else," she said. "But home, I've learned, isn't always where you started." Rachel looked at her. "It's where you're finally seen." Eleanor nodded, her voice low. "And where you choose to see others." That night, Rachel found an envelope taped to the inside of the old bedroom closet. Eleanor had already left by then, quietly before sunset. No goodbyes, just the echo of the door closing gently behind her. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. "Rachel, this house has known laughter, betrayal, music, and silence. Now it will know healing because of you. Do with it what I could not. Make it a place of memory, not just for those lost, but for those still trying to find themselves. I don't know what the law says about inheritance, but I know what love says. Sometimes we give things away not because we don't want them, but because someone else needs them more. Be well, be brave. Eleanor." Rachel sat on the bed, the note in her lap, the house humming softly around her. She cried that night, not for what she'd gained, but for the woman who had left her a legacy not of bricks and beams, but of forgiveness. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was from James, handwritten, uneven. "Rachel, I owe you an apology, not just for what I said, but for how I looked at you as an intruder, a threat. You weren't. You never were. You were part of him, the part none of us had the courage to see. Thank you for not fighting back. Thank you for giving my mother something I didn't. I hope we meet again someday on different terms. James." Rachel folded the letter and placed it beside Eleanor's. Spring turned warmer. She began work on the foundation the following month. The house would stay standing, but its walls would now shelter something new, the Michael Dunne Children's Fund. a small grassroots scholarship program aimed at helping children from unstable homes pursue education, music, literature, whatever their heart longed for. Rachel set up reading rooms, kept the garden open to the public, planted violets near the front steps, and left a small plaque with Eleanor's name beneath them. Every Saturday morning she'd play one of Michael's old records. The sound would drift through the open windows and down Chestnut Street, soft, steady, like a promise being kept. Sometimes Eleanor visited, not often, but enough. She lived by the sea now, in a modest apartment where gulls cried in the morning and waves tapped the windows like old friends. She'd walk the beach with a thermos of tea and a worn paperback in her coat pocket. And when people asked where she was from, she'd smile and say, "I used to live in a house full of stories. Now I live inside one." The waves were quieter in Gloucester, not gone, never silent, but softened like they understood something had been put to rest. Eleanor's apartment sat on the second floor of a weathered blue building overlooking the harbor. The window in her small living room faced east, catching morning light like it had been made to hold it. A modest balcony wrapped around the edge, just wide enough for a chair, a table, and a flower pot she still hadn't planted anything in. She liked it that way, bare, waiting. It had been 3 months since she'd left Chestnut Street. 3 months since she handed over keys to a stranger who had never really been a stranger. Now her days were slow, purposeful, quiet in the way only someone who had known deep noise could appreciate. Every morning Eleanor wrote, not letters, not stories, not even full paragraphs, just memories, one per page, one truth at a time. Michael always turned his pillow twice before sleeping. I never asked why. The year we lost the baby, he planted 3 extra rose bushes. I never learned how to scream when I was angry, only how to leave the room. She didn't number the pages. There was no intention to publish, no grand reveal, just ink and breath and the ache that comes with letting truth dry on paper. In the evenings she made tea, rooibos, weak chamomile, sometimes just hot water with lemon, and she read, always one letter at a time, because Rachel never missed a week. They were handwritten, always sealed with a wax stamp. Rachel had made herself an owl wings open. Inside were updates, photographs, small sketches of the house's restoration, and little things Rachel had learned that week. Did you know violets can survive frost if they root deep enough? I opened the attic and found a box of old books labeled for when it rains. James sent a donation to the fund. Anonymous, but I recognized his handwriting. Eleanor saved every letter in a wooden box shaped like a lighthouse. Michael's once, now hers. She never replied with words, but every month she sent Rachel a book, sometimes second-hand, sometimes new, always underlined, always with pressed wildflowers tucked between pages. One morning in early June she heard a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Rachel standing on the balcony, wind-tousled and flushed from the climb up the stairs. She was holding something behind her back. "I should have called," Rachel said. "I don't own a phone anymore," Eleanor replied. "Come in." They sat by the open window, the sea stretching out before them like a promise. Rachel didn't speak at first. Her hands were trembling slightly, and Eleanor watched her with the soft patience of someone who understood that some words needed time to arrive. Finally, Rachel placed a wrapped package on the table. "I made something," she said, "for the foundation, for me, for you." Eleanor unwrapped it slowly. Beneath the paper was a canvas, a portrait of herself, not young, not old, somewhere in between. A version of Eleanor captured in a moment of quiet defiance, eyes lifted, not smiling, not sorrowful, simply there, whole. "I didn't know what you looked like when you were younger," Rachel said, "so I painted you the way I imagine you felt when you were still fighting for yourself but hadn't realized it yet." Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Then unexpectedly she laughed. Rachel blinked. "Is it bad?" "No," Eleanor said, wiping her eyes. "It's perfect. But you made me look like someone I want to become, not someone I used to be." Rachel's voice was soft. "Maybe that's the point." Eleanor stood and leaned the portrait against the wall. "You hung this in the house, in the library, above the fireplace, where people can see it when they're reading." Eleanor looked out at the sea. "Then it's in the right place." They sat for a while longer, talking, drinking tea, letting silence bloom comfortably between words. Rachel stood to leave just before sunset. At the door she turned. "You were right." "About what?" "Not being the last one." Eleanor smiled. "No one who chooses to love again ever is." After Rachel left, Eleanor walked back inside and picked up the portrait. She stared at her own painted eyes, and for the first time in a long, long while, she felt seen, not for her grief, not for her loss, but for the woman she had been underneath it all. The wind had changed, not in any dramatic way. No thunderclouds, no storm, but in the way that seasoned sailors and grieving widows could always feel. It carried a stillness, a kind of earned silence, like the ocean had finally released something it had been holding onto for too long. Eleanor sat at her small writing table, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her fountain pen in hand. The early morning sun fell gently on the page before her, warming the lines already inked. The window beside her was open just enough to let in the salty breeze, and in the distance the waves folded onto the shore with their usual slow devotion. The journal lay thick with pages now, not all of them about Michael, not all of them about grief. Somewhere along the way her writing had shifted not away from the past, but towards something new. The stories became less about what she had lost, and more about what she had found in the absence. She turned to the last page, the final entry. Her handwriting was smaller now, steadier than it had been in the beginning. This is not a story of betrayal, nor is it a story of justice. This is the story of a woman who learned that the law may divide property, but it cannot divide love. A woman who once thought herself the last leaf on the tree, but who lived long enough to see spring again. Justice is not always written in ink and legal stamps. Sometimes it's written in the courage it takes to love those who were never meant to belong to you. Love that chooses, despite the pain. She paused, lifted her pen one last time and wrote, "Justice is not always written in law. Sometimes it is written in brave love." She placed the pen down, closed the journal. For a while she simply sat there, listening to the seagulls call to one another, letting her chest rise and fall in time with the surf. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something just as rare, understanding. Across town in the old house on Chestnut Street, sunlight poured through the library window like a blessing. Rachel sat at the piano Michael's dusted and restored. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, coaxing a slow, tender tune into the room. Something wordless, ancient, like a lullaby hummed by memory itself. The music echoed faintly through the halls where children's laughter now sometimes broke the quiet. The scholarship program had launched last week. A few volunteers helped with reading circles. A retired carpenter had offered to rebuild the back porch. Rachel ran it all herself quietly, and with care, always under the gaze of Eleanor's painted portrait. The eyes in that portrait weren't just watching, they were present. They belonged to someone who had known great hurt and still chosen grace. Someone who had once been erased, but was now remembered, precisely for the way she had refused to vanish. On the wall beside the piano hung a new photograph. Rachel had placed it there 2 weeks ago, right after the first spring blossom in the garden. The photo was candid, a beach snapshot. Michael, his arm casually draped around Eleanor, and Rachel, standing beside them, caught mid-laugh wind pulling strands of hair across her face. It was the only picture the three of them had together. A strange family, one never intended, one born in fire, lies forgiveness, and finally a choice. Rachel often looked at it before she played. It grounded her, gave her permission to keep creating something new from the pieces of a fractured story. Back at the shore, Eleanor had begun her walk. Her steps were slower these days, but not hesitant, just mindful, like someone who knew what it cost to hurry and what it meant to savor. She wore her soft gray sweater, the one with sleeves a little too long, and in her hand she held the photo Rachel had sent her, the same one that now hung beside the piano. She carried it like a fragile truth protected from the sea air, but held close to the light. As she walked along the waterline, waves lapping at her boots, she passed an old fisherman folding his nets. He nodded respectfully, and she returned the gesture with a quiet smile. Everyone in town knew her by now. The woman from the lighthouse apartment, the one who lived alone but didn't seem lonely, who carried herself like she'd survived a kind of war without a single visible wound. Eleanor reached the outcropping at the edge of the bay and sat on the flat stone she'd claimed as her own months ago. From there she could see the curve of the shoreline, the masts bobbing in the harbor, and beyond them the wide expanse of Atlantic blue. She looked down at the photo in her hand. ran her thumb gently over Michael's face, then Rachel's, then her own. So strange, she thought, that after a lifetime of trying to keep everything in place, it had taken letting go to finally feel whole. She didn't cry, not today. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the wind press against her skin. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't brace against it. When she opened her eyes again, she whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the world, for not ending when she thought it would, for giving her a daughter she didn't ask for, and a second ending that felt somehow like a better beginning." She stood, tucked the photo into the inside pocket of her coat, and walked back toward the town. Not fast, but forward, always forward.